Hi everyone, here I am today with William Hussey, and we're going to be talking about his latest book, which is called Killing Jericho. And I'm not going to make any apologies for the fact that I will be very much fangirling during this interview, because I absolutely love the book and I can't wait to hear what Bill's got to say about it. So if I can come over to you, Bill, if you just tell us a little bit about the book and perhaps we could have a reading, that'd be wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, Killing Jericho features the first ever traveller detective in crime fiction history. So it's the first one. And it's very much based on my background, as I grew up on a travelling fairground. And I always thought travellers would make brilliant detectives. And in the reading I'm going to give, it will kind of explain why that's the case. But basically, we've got a character, he's fresh out of prison. And he goes back to the fairground family that once rejected him, and he's on a bit of a downward spiral. But then a case comes along, and a killer appears to be recreating the victims of a fairground tragedy that happened 150 years ago. And this reawakens Jericho's interest in mysteries, and he begins to investigate the case. So lots of twists and turns and a big twist ending, basically. So I will read you just a couple of pages. This is from chapter 3, so very early on in the book. The skills of a showman are born of his trade. First, he must hone the ability to speak the spiel, to chat the chat, to gain the confidence of every kind of punter. Second, his business is observation. A fair might run for a week, but there'll only be a few golden hours each night in which his living must be earned. In that time, he'll assess tiny gestures, the flutter of a finger over a pocket, the evidence of cash already spent in the form of sugared lips and torn ticket stubs, the firm or carefree steerage of a child. Third, and most importantly, he knows human nature. The fair is the last great leveller. All human life passes through our turnstiles, and over the centuries, we've learned their ways, their quirks and commonalities, the patterns that perhaps only priests and showmen can read. Some of these gifts I acquired in my first 18 years living the life. Others seem hardwired into me. Strange thing is, it wasn't until Pete Garris pointed it out that I realized these were also the skills of a gifted detective. I put them to use now. For obvious reasons, paedophiles are attracted to fairgrounds. Not that show people ever give them much of a chance. A strongly worded warning usually sends them on their way. And so I followed this specimen to the northbound exit of the fair. He walked with a twitchy gait, his appearance stark among the crowd, a Mohican with flame-dyed side panels, chin-piercing, retro stones t-shirt hanging off his toothpick torso, pinstripe trousers and neon green trainers, almost as if he wanted to be noticed. The fairground fell away as we entered the churned-up field that served as a temporary car park. Families clustered around their saloons, mums and dads distracted by the complexity of infant seats, toddlers galore ripe for the picking. The human exclamation point I tailed didn't spare them a glance. He was focused only on escape, and yet. Why did he slow when a 4x4 trundled across his path? There were seconds now, ample moments in which to disappear, but the car passed and I located him in exactly the same position. I frowned. I'd seen a lot during my time in uniform, things that ought to have inured me to the sight of the Malinowski children in their wardrobe coffin, yet nothing of the typical predator profile fitted this guy. He kept looking back, nervous as hell, yet somehow tethered to me. The fair was no more than a throbbing thumbprint in the sky by the time we reached the main road and took our odd little game into the commercial heart of this London commuter belt town. It was here, amid spruced up canals and gentrified warehouses, that a possibility occurred. Was this a trap? A strategy of Kerrigan's to pull me out of the safety of the fairground? He comes to the fair and puts on a display all mock menace, then introduces bait he know will catch my eye. The nonce is a sacrificial lamb, coerced by Kerrigan into playing the lure, and if he takes a punch or two before the Knights of St. George arrive on the scene, well, the fascists claim they have no love of kiddie fiddlers. But all this presupposed a cunning that was alien to Kerrigan, a man who only got away with murder because the lead interviewer on his case had beaten the ever-living shit out of him. And anyway, he knew I needed no inducement. If he'd invited me to a meeting, I would gladly have attended. On now, we passed down a brightly painted quayside at an almost companionable saunter. The guy's shoulders relaxed a little. We were on home turf. Through a narrow alley, we came into a Disneyland version of a Dickens dockyard, its once polluted face scraped back to the bone. From old customs houses, international coffee shops doled out their wares to chattering men in business suits. Out of the dockyard into another alley, there could be no question about me having followed him now. He even shot me a gutsy little smile, the kind that would have made Jesus climb down from the cross and flip the human race the bird. At the door to a warehouse conversion, he stopped, his hand hovering over the entry keypad. Please come upstairs. We can talk properly in the flat. He glanced down at my fists, and for the first time since hearing Kerrigan's name, I flexed my fingers. I'll tell you what you need to know. You won't have to hurt me.
Excellent. Goodness me, that really does set the scene really well. Really does. Now, anyone that hasn't read the book will tell from that reading that this is pitched older than the books that you've written previously. Was that a really different experience for you, writing for an older audience?
Well, I always say that even when I'm writing young adult books, I tend not to pull my punches, and I leave it to the editor to decide whether a scene is either too violent or too upsetting, because I think that teenagers have a very acute antennae for being pandered to or spoken down to, and so you shouldn't really pull your punches with them. They don't like being patronized. And so how I approach all books, because I love reading all kinds of fiction, YA, romance, detective stories, horror stories, adult crime, is I just think, what is the kind of book that I would like to read? And with Jericho, what I wanted to do was fuse together the kind of hard-boiled detective stories of like Raymond Chandler, that kind of like era, with a kind of classic murder mystery puzzle in Agatha Christie tradition, but also bring in the Gothic elements of the detective story, which were really prevalent at the birth of the detective story, with people like Edgar Allan Poe and Conan Doyle. And, one of my favorite detective stories is The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is a locked room, the first probably locked room murder mystery story, but has this real relationship with the kind of like the dark overtones of Gothic fiction as well. So those kind of three elements of the detective story, the hard-boiled PI, the classic murder mystery, and the Gothic background of the horror story, I wanted to bring in and mold them all together in one book, really.
For me, certainly as a teenager, I was absolutely obsessed with Ed McBain and all 87
writer.
Precinct mysteries, and I was reminded of that whilst I was reading Jericho, although it's not the same story in any means, but it was just the feel of it reminded me of those Ed McBain stories. So it was interesting for me that you did mention Raymond Chandler, very much the same sort of writer. So obviously this also had recently, you've had another book out recently with Broken Hearts and Zombie Parts, which again, very different. Loved it, absolutely loved it. But both books have kind of got autobiographical elements to them, haven't they, in both of those stories? I was particularly interested in Jericho in the bits where you were talking about the traditions of fairgrounds and the expectations, especially on males in a fairground community. And was that something you really felt strongly about putting across? Because we don't see that sort of representation in any other books.
Yeah, absolutely. There are traveller characters that you encounter in all of fiction and in detective fiction as well. But I had never, ever really read a convincing depiction of the travelling fairground showman. Traveller is an umbrella term, and it covers lots of different traveller people. And when people write about it and they don't know about the life, they will mix up all of these different groups. So you'll often have depictions of fairgrounds being run by what people might think of Romany travellers. And that is a completely separate group of people. And it comes basically from a place of like ignorance. They're not doing their research enough. And even the ones who do their research, you've not lived the life. So you're not picking up the nuances of it. So, as I said, a couple of things I wanted to portray that life in the round. So I wanted all the positive elements, and there are massive positive elements there. It's a community that will support you no matter what. So what, if you've made a mistake in life or whatever happens, like with Jericho, you can come back to them. You'll be welcomed back into the bosom of the family. They will give you their last penny. They will put a roof over your head. They will always support you. There are also lots of challenges in that, especially, say, for LGBTQ people who have grown up in the life, because they're still small c conservative attitudes. And because it's a very hard physical job, it kind of promotes that idea within the community of the alpha male, the provider, the person who's going to have to go out there, come rain or shine, build up. I mean, hugely physical, demanding jobs. That's why Jericho is naturally a very big guy, because building up those things, it's like 7 workouts a day. But then it also has the thing of very clearly defined gender roles within it.
Yeah.
There are very strong women in traveller life, but they have their particular role within it. Work hugely hard and everything. But so I wanted to depict all of it, the good parts, the bad parts, and from an insider's perspective. And I honestly think, hopefully, the mystery is intriguing and the ending is a surprise, and it's a pacey read. But I also wanted it to be a real insight for readers into the world I don't think has ever really been accurately represented before in fiction.
I couldn't agree more. I've certainly never read anything about that community before, which was what made it so intriguing and fascinating for me. And for me, as you say, it's the portrayal of the gender roles within that society. An acquaintance of mine is from a traveller family, not from a fair grandfather, but from a traveller family, and has been struggling with mental illness. And it took him so long to even admit it and accept any help, because he'd very much been indoctrinated that was a weakness. Men don't get depressed. Men don't get upset. So, I mean, I thought that was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed it. It was also darn scary, Bill. I mean, come on. There were several bits where I was quite glad for my bedside lamp. It's got to be said. I've been talking about the book in several Facebook groups, and just for those that are watching, the question I've often been asked is, what sort of age group would appreciate the book, particularly because we're dealing with schools. And I personally have always said year 11 upwards. So like 15, 16-year-olds upwards, because I don't think any year 11s would have any problems with accessing anything within it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I think if, I was talking to a school that's ordered some copies the other day, and they said, where should we place it in our library? And I said, GCSE up to sixth form kind of area. So yeah, I would say 15 and up. Yeah. And it's nothing, schools have copies of Stephen King, for example, and it is a dark book, but it doesn't go to the levels of violence that are in some of Stephen King's books, but it is a dark read. So yeah, I would agree with that. I'd say kind of 15. If you thought of it as an age certificate, I would say 15 and above. Yeah.
So okay, I've got to ask this question. This isn't going to be our only encounter with Jericho, I'm hoping.
No, book 2 is already written, so it's not it's not published yet. It's not edited yet, rather. But book 2 originally had a different title, and what we decided to do was, my editors were saying, we want something that's really going to be a big, punchy title like Killing Jericho, so that we can kind of, because initially it's going to be 3 books, and if they're successful, there'll be more in the trilogy in the thing. But book 2 is called Jericho's Dead, and it has about 2 or 3 different meanings, that title. So all I can tell you a little tiny little bit about it. It's set about 3 months after killing Jericho. We're now Halloween, so it's set around Halloween, and a serial killer is apparently targeting psychics, mediums, fortune tellers. Anyone who claims that they are able to speak with the dead is being targeted by this serial killer. So, and the case comes very close to home for Jericho. So that's a little tease.
Very excited. Very excited. So how long have we got to wait for that one?
They'll be out this time next year.
Next year. Oh my goodness.
Next year.
Ages.
I know.
When you've been
Oh,
talking about your about the influences, who would you say has been your biggest influence with your writing, especially with this book?
I'd definitely say Agatha Christie, because although it's got all that noir elements, which didn't really feature, although I would argue about that, you know, because books like And Then There Were None or The Pale Horse, very, very dark, or The Crooked House, which was another one of hers, extremely dark. And I always have this argument with people when they say, oh, she's cozy. And I say, she's not cozy at all. You're talking about this writer who came up with, I mean, I don't know about you, but a whole group of killers get together in a conspiracy and decide they are going to systematically murder someone because that person abducted and murdered a child. You know, that's one of her plots. Another plot, you know, a child is drowned in a apple bobbing barrel on Halloween. That doesn't sound very cozy to me.
No.
So definitely Agatha Christie, because what I really wanted to do with the book was I was a bit sick of reading crime thrillers where you needed a degree in forensics to work out who the murderer was.
Yeah.
Or B, the person does twist, but you had no chance of working out the twist. There's either no clues or they give you the clues 5 pages before the twist happens. Now, to me, that's cheating. So all the clues in Jericho, there are about 6 or 7 clues in Jericho as to what's going on, are all everyday things that are basically like Christie does with her brilliant stuff, like a misheard phrase or someone sees something but they misinterpret the significance of it. So it's all clues like that everyday reader can work out. And at the end of the thing, I always think at the end, if you have worked it out, and a couple of people have, but not very many, if you have worked it out, then you feel satisfied with that. And if you haven't worked it out, you go, oh, that's brilliant. But you feel like you've been dealt a fair hand, that you could have worked it out. So definitely Christie in those terms is like the biggest influence on the book.
Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Oh, a pleasure, a pleasure.
Thoroughly recommend anybody that's watching this video, you've got to go out and get the book. It is amazing. You are going to love it. Okay.
A pleasure. Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye.